Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. This is Season 1, Episode 17, and I'm Ramjee Chandran. Today, we're in Part 4 of the Chalukyas. And coming right up is the history of Pulakesin II, easily the most important king of the Chalukyas. In the time of Pulakesin II, political thought emphasized that any prince, or really anyone seeking to establish rule or challenge an existing imperial power, should possess three critical qualities: Prabhu Shakti, which is the authority of rulership; Mantra Shakti, which is strategic wisdom; and Utsaha Shakti, which is indomitable zeal or energy, which means he has to have the mojo to be able to rule the soil. Pulakesin II checked all these boxes. His career, and indeed his character, were deeply influenced by that prevailing philosophy. Yet, he also played a significant role in shaping the course of the history of the Deccan during his reign. Indeed, I would go so far as to say the larger history of India, but as we all know, the history of the South, for some reason, has been buried for all of these years. Nonetheless, in terms of history, this was a time when the general Deccan area, from the Chalukyan terrain of the west coast through the Mysore Deccan, through the Pallava and Pandya domains, saw things becoming more sophisticated, more cosmopolitan. International relations went from merely trade to scholarly and diplomatic engagement. The very famous Chinese scholar Xuanzang dropped by, for one. The stories and histories recorded by these international visitors have contributed hugely towards improving what we know today about those kingdoms, and all of their stories have been an invaluable addition to our historical records. For one thing, even if these traveling scholars were often awestruck by the wealth of the lands they visited in India, their tone was always curious and their accounts respectful of customs and traditions. Importantly, they didn't couch everything they saw in exaggerated tribute to their king or patron, because they didn't have to. Equally important from their stories, we can tell that they were welcomed and given the freedom to travel through each country and interact with a variety of people, from the king right down the ticket. This would point to the interest that the Deccan kings had in finding out more about the world and letting the world find out more about themselves. This was a fascinating time to be discovering the world. Everything must have been new, every conversation, every discovery. And back in Vatapi, when the young Pulakesin II became the king of the Chalukyas, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in statecraft. The story of Pulakesin II, after I paused to thank my sponsors, the Prestige Group, because of whose corporate sponsorship this podcast became possible. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. In my last episode, I left you at the point where Pulakesin II had gotten to a fratricidal war against his uncle Mangalesha in the Battle of Elpattu Simbighe. When Mangalesha had begun to rule as regent, the future looked bright for the Chalukyas. Through lucrative raids and conquests, and on the peaceful side, the encouragement of culture, and with competent and far-sighted administration, the Chalukyas were solid. And then things went sideways in Mangalesha's mind. Having decided that he was not going to merely be a regent anymore, he wanted the line of succession of the Chalukyas to continue with his own son. And he seemed to have become insecure, even paranoid, probably because he was coming to grips with reconciling his ambitions with his lack of legitimacy to the throne. And as a result of all this, these were dark days for the Chalukyan Empire. So when Pulakesin left the kingdom, or was driven out by Mangalesha, he sought refuge in the dominion of the Banas. And there, in the Bana capital at Kolar, he found not only his welcome, but also an ally. And Pulakesin started to put together his plan to return to Vatapi and take the Chalukyan throne that was his by birthright. Now, going back briefly to those three attributes that I had mentioned about the qualifications required for someone to challenge the throne, these critical qualities of Prabhu Shakti, Mantra Shakti, and Utsaha Shakti, but as a refugee and an exile, brooding in the Bana heartland, Pulakesin saw that he had two of these qualities, Mantra Shakti and Utsaha Shakti, which is wisdom and the energy. What he did not have was Prabhu Shakti, the throne itself. Mangalesha had that, the throne that is, and Pulakesin needed to take the throne from him by force if necessary. And the most important sources to learn about what happened from this point on are covered by the evocative Aihole inscription of Ravi Kirtis, the plates discovered in Modlim in southern Maharashtra, and an inscription discovered in the village of Peddavadaguru, which is in Andhra. It follows from a reading of all these sources that Pulakesin sought the assistance of the kingdoms that bordered the Chalukyan territory, the most significant of these being the Bana kingdom. With the active assistance of several kings secured, Pulakesin began to marshal forces. He built an army that he could command. Now word of all this activity reached Mangalesha and Vatapi. It is important to remember that back then, as it is now, spying was a recognized and well-documented craft going as far back as the Arthashastra. Kingdoms maintained a standing network of well-trained spies who would routinely report on all the goings-on in all the other domains. So it is likely that Mangalesha, and indeed all the other Deccan kingdoms, would have received complete and regular reports on what Pulakesin was up to, and that Mangalesha must have considered to be a rebellion. Now Mangalesha was in a situation where he had usurped the throne for himself from his nephew, and was all set to anoint his own son as a successor, and Pulakesin had left the kingdom, possibly banned by Mangalesha himself. Everything was peaceful and Mangalesha was ruling, or so he thought, and now he was receiving reports that Pulakesin was arming himself. Predictably, he was not pleased. So deciding that it would be best to smash the opposition with brute force before it was too late, Mangalesha took his army into the Bana territory. The opposing forces met on the fields of Elpattu Simbighe, a village or a hamlet located at the town of Nadanuru. The exact location is not well documented, but if it was a village in the broader region influenced by early Chalukyan and Bana kingdoms, it could have been in the vicinity of the modern-day Anantapur, which is near the northern part of Tamil Nadu, right into the Telugu regions. Given that Anantapur lies within a region historically influenced by the Chalukyan and Bana dynasty, Nadanuru could well have been situated relatively close to Anantapur, or within its surrounding districts at the least. This proximity aligns with the historical reach of these empires and their administrative divisions, so in all likelihood, that's where Elpattu Simbighe was. As for the battle, fratricidal wars are not unknown in India or anywhere else, mythology even, but there is no accounting for the emotions that must have ruled high in the battle of Elpattu Simbighe as uncle arrived to defeat the nephew. The nephew, who must have played on the lap of this uncle, his father's close and beloved brother, the very uncle who had now arrived with a large army to end the claim of his nephew to the throne and possibly his life. But what really drove the bloodletting would have been the terrifying sense of purpose of two men trying to defend their destiny. In a fight like this, there could only be one winner and really only one outcome. When I return, what happened on the fields of Elpattu Simbighe and after? Right after this word from our sponsors.
Just how the North Star is the guiding light, the star of North Bangalore, Prestige Camden Gardens is a guiding light where your search for the perfect home ends. Prestige Camden Gardens, the star of North Bangalore. Step up to luxury with 3 and 4 BHK apartments on Tanisandra Main Road, 10 minutes from Manyata Tech Park, 25 minutes from the airport, and well connected with other parts of the city. Prestige Camden Gardens. Prices starting from 2.25 crore onwards. To know more, visit prestigeconstructions.com. RERA approved.
Hi, I'm back, and we are watching the fields of Elpattu Simbighe that would soon run with the blood of hundreds, if not thousands of soldiers, each fighting for the honor of his king. The battle must have been a most loud and bloody affair. In the knowledge that he was about to fight the forces of kingdoms and principalities who had all decided to throw their support behind Pulakesin, Mangalesha must have brought a large army to the battlefield. Equally, Pulakesin and his allies would have spared nothing in their preparation to face one of the most dreaded armies of the Deccan. It was a battle-hardened army that had only recently laid waste to the Kalachuris in the north, weaponized a naval fleet to attack and take Revati Dvipa or Goa, and also attacked and subjugated many smaller kingdoms and principalities. It doesn't take much to picture the scene. Both sides with infantry, archers, cavalry, and trained horse and elephant brigades. When the battle ended, Mangalesha, the uncle, lay dead on the battlefield, and standing over him was the victor, Pulakesin II. And now Pulakesin had attained that third qualification that he needed to become the Maharaja, the Prabhu Shakti that Mangalesha had tried in vain to pass on to his own heir. Ravi Kirti's Aihole inscription has this rather poetic description of how the clouds of darkness that had eclipsed Mangalesha's reign had parted to a new light. It reads, "Then, on the subversion of that rule encompassed by the darkness of enemies, the whole world grew light again, invaded as it were by the lustrous rays of Pulakesin's irresistible splendor. Or when was it that the sky ceased to be black, like a swarm of bees with thundering clouds in which flashes of lightning were dancing like banners and the edges of which were crushed in the rushing wind?" Bathed in this new swath of metaphoric light, let's throw in blood dripping from his sword, stood Mangalesha II, the new monarch of the Chalukyan Empire. Before he returned home to Vatapi in a triumphant parade, Pulakesin would have had to bid farewell to his hosts, the Banas. And he took care of one more thing that is documented in the Peddavaduguru grant that I talked about earlier. And this one refers to Pulakesin II as Ereyati Adigal, the respectful version of Ereya being Pulakesin's given name at birth. The grant records the grateful gift of the village of Elpattu Simbighe tax-free for the creation of an agrahara for the village Brahmins. The Peddavaduguru grant reads, "This inscription has been created to document the grant of the village of Elpattu Simbighe in the presence of the noble Ereyati Adigal, who exhibited unparalleled valor in battle. The respected leaders of the community gathered to commemorate the victory. The village of Elpattu Simbighe is hereby granted as prasada, means favor, to serve as an agrahara to the Brahmins, free from all tax obligations. The grant has been made with the consent and approval of the Bana rulers, ensuring it is held in perpetuity." I need to mention that there is more than one interpretation of this grant, as it was written in archaic Kannada and hard to understand. But some of this appears to be misinterpretation about the name Rana Vikrama as a Bana king, while it's really another name for Mangalesha. Now, the interpretation of the inscription by some historians concludes that Pulakesin killed a Bana king and subjugated him. But this interpretation is puzzling, and indeed it is a theory discredited by other historians. I mention it here for students of history who might have heard or read the alternate version. With some due diligence, what I have just provided was my attempt to paraphrase the literal translation, and it ought to hold up for scrutiny. If it does not, I would be honored to be set straight on the subject by scholars. Coming back, the reason I dwell on this grant and its text is because there is a subtext to it that is important in history, and this goes to the relationship between the Chalukyas and the Banas. Now, who were the Banas? They were a well-known kingdom in the Deccan, and they keep popping up in historical references. But despite a semblance of sovereignty, they're always referred to in connection with the larger empire. So how much of a force were they? For one thing, information about them is limited. We know that there were feudatories at large and at some point served as feudatories of the Pallavas, the Cholas, the Pandyas, and the Chalukyas. The tricky part to this whole thing is trying to understand how this fits into what happened with them helping Pulakesin ascend to the throne. Also, the Peddavaduguru inscription refers to Pulakesin more in the tone reserved for overlords than for refugees. For example, giving refuge to Pulakesin II and then letting him gift a whole village as a grant for the agrahara suggests that Pulakesin had more than a casual relationship as a guest of the Banas. There is some epigraphical evidence that suggests that the Banas were loyal feudatories to Kirtivarman I, Pulakesin's father. And if they were sensitive to the rule by law of succession, it works that they helped Pulakesin correct the injustice of Mangalesha. Not to mention great favors should Pulakesin get to the throne and be grateful for their assistance. And then there's the other possibility. The Banas had always been fluid in their alliances, and they were not known to be independently strong. We might remember from the episode on the Kadambas how Mayura Sharman, who built his kingdom in the forest, repeatedly carried out guerrilla attacks against the Banas and brought them to the point where they had to pay protection money to keep him from causing more confusion in their ranks. So the other possibility that I speak of is this. As word got out that there was trouble in the Chalukyan homestead, the Pallavas would have made moves to increase their presence in the region, sensing opportunities. Getting the Banas on their side would have been an important and a strategic step. So what skullduggery went on behind the scenes as Pulakesin prepared to oust Mangalesha and take the throne is not documented, but the math works. It is not out of the realm of possibility that the Banas may have been encouraged to host Pulakesin and join him in giving battle to Mangalesha. Because whatever would have been the outcome, a coup would have caused confusion and instability in the Chalukya kingdom, and such things have a chance of ending very badly for the Chalukyas and very well for others to either invade the Chalukyas or carve up their territory. And this would have been the more lucrative option for the Banas. Indeed, in the months that followed, the Banas, who had their capital at Kolar towards the east, and in Gudimalam, a village near Tirupati, shifted allegiance and became feudatories of the Pallavas. That said, what did come true is the confusion and instability that followed in the wake of the killing of Mangalesha. Now, normally Pulakesin would have returned to Vatapi, a hero who claimed his inheritance by righteous force, to much pomp and circumstance, nobles, subjects, and feudatories queuing up to protest their loyalty and, to borrow a phrase, kiss the ring. But in periods of political uncertainty, it was typical for vassals, opportunists, and adventurers through the empire to try and seize the moment. But in the present case, these schemers would really have tried anything only if they were underestimating the abilities of the young Pulakesin II. And indeed, two of them did. Even before Pulakesin had the time to reach Vatapi and settle down, he was openly challenged to battle by two men, Apayika and Govinda. There is no conclusive evidence on who they were exactly. Some say that they ruled a principality that lay north of the Bhima river, that would be the northern parts of the Chalukyan kingdoms, which is presently the southern Maratha region such as Satara and Kolhapur. Or maybe they were simply adventurers who thought that this was an opportunity to carve out a part of the Chalukyan kingdom towards the north. Word of their intent reached Pulakesin as the two men approached the Bhima river with a horde of elephants, an indication that this would be a serious battle. The Aihole inscription in one pithy verse sums up Pulakesin's abilities as a warrior, a diplomat, a strategist, and a statesman. Pulakesin wasted little time in addressing the problem. He took his forces and drove them right into the two men in the north. And then, using the principle of divide and conquer, he set one man against the other. By reading different interpretations of the epigraphical evidence, it would transpire that Pulakesin managed to turn Govinda against Apayika, defeating Apayika in battle. Now, the fate of Apayika is not known, but we do learn that Pulakesin later rewarded Govinda for his services. The question lingers, who were they? Were they, as historian Bhandarkar suggests, Rashtrakutas? As significant and prescient as this is, because this business of the Rashtrakutas will visit us in our journey through the history of the Chalukyas, this was another victory for the young emperor of the Chalukyas, Pulakesin II. These battles behind him, Pulakesin II faced no further serious opposition to his claim to the throne. And despite the fact that this confusion and instability would have taken him several months, if not a year, to resolve, he returned to Vatapi to focus on restoring the empire's former splendor that had been somewhat rattled. Reaching Vatapi, Pulakesin would have made it up that steep, narrow slope that leads up to the gates of the impregnable fort on the hill, and he must have stood overlooking the magnificence of Vatapi spread out before him between the foot of the hill and the Malaprabha river that ran a few kilometers away. All of Vatapi and the entire kingdom beyond it was all his by right. His gaze fixed on the horizon, it is said that he at once began to plan the path to take the Chalukyan Empire to greater heights. But right now, he took on the mantle of king and also the grand title, Satyashraya Shri Prithvi Vallabha Maharaja Adhiraja Parameshwara Bhattara, which means Satyashraya, the illustrious and revered, the great king, supreme sovereign, and lord of the universe. Coming up in the next episode is the meteoric rise and crash of Pulakesin II, and that's coming up sooner than usual. I shan't make you wait for the story of this most fascinating of kings. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.